Hello once again, everybody. Thank you for joining me here on this special edition of Bang the Book Radio for Tuesday, July 23rd. We're going to chat some college football with professional handicapper Rolf Michaels of WagerTalk.com. We're going to spend some time here taking a look at three conferences, two of my choosing, one of Rolf's choosing here as we talk about the Pac-12, the Big 12, and then the Mountain West Conference as we take a look at our first group of five. Of course, last Wednesday with Brad Powers, we talked about the SEC, ACC, and the Big 10. Still plenty of shelf life to that. So make sure you go back and check that one out if you haven't already. Over at BangTheBook.com, my college football power ratings have been posted. In the power ratings article, there's a link to my spreadsheet with the schedules for all 130 teams, my projected lines for those games, my expected wins, then also all of the win total numbers for the 130 teams that are out there based on my power ratings. I'll have some articles up this week over at BangTheBook.com. We're also going to start with our conference and division season win total articles, divisions for the Power 5, full conference previews for the Group of 5, and the independents. So something for you to look forward to over there at BangTheBook.com to go along with my MLB picks and tips and all the other different stuff we've got going on. Very, very busy time of year, to say the least. Before I bring Rolf on, I just want to mention, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB and the number 200 is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the Sportsbook, 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. One guest joins me here on this special edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is Rolf Michaels, professional handicapper over at WagerTalk.com. Rolf, how's it going today, man?
Adam, I'm so excited. 10 days into the Hall of Fame game, 32 days until Florida and Miami kick off at Camping World Stadium. Football's around the corner.
Yes, sir, it definitely is. And it's been a little while since we've talked with you, man. How's your summer going?
Summer's going well. It's it's hot. It's hot here in Vegas, but as they say out here, it's a dry heat. So 109 is not too bad. I'm one to stay more in the shade, hang out in the pool and read a book, doing a little baseball, but doing a lot of work on football. So excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, we had heat into season the 110s here recently in the Cleveland area, and it was about 95 degrees with about 95% humidity. So I'll take the 109 actual high temperature versus the adding 15 degrees to the real field because of humidity. That's for damn sure.
There's really nothing you can't do at 109. Yes, it's hotter than hell, and you get in your car and it's boiling over, but you just do things slower. You drink a little bit more, and you could still go out and you could still do your normal everyday events even with a 109 degree temperature in Las Vegas.
Now, here's something I do want to touch on with you here before we actually look at some of these specific conferences. We talked a lot with Brad last week about games of the year, about season win totals, about stuff going on in the industry with the differences between the win total numbers in New Jersey versus the ones in Las Vegas, that type of thing. As you mentioned, though, you're doing baseball, and that's something different between you and Brad. Brad does not do baseball. He's just getting ready for the football season. So he's very capitalized to go out there and play the season win totals, the games of the year, all that type of thing. Obviously, with you doing baseball, some of your bankrolls, some of your funds still tied up. Did you do some win total and game of the year stuff, or are you just kind of waiting for week 0 that you mentioned earlier with that Miami-Florida game?
I did couple week ones, and I did couple games of the year. The season win totals came out, and I wasn't quite ready for them, and I wasn't able to partake in them. I know that you are certainly correct. The shopping around, even with the different lines in the Vegas area and in New Jersey, there was some crazy value there. So I think you'll see more and more sharp bettors be better situated next year to have funds available in New Jersey to take advantage of some of those very soft lines that open there.
Well, again, week 1 coming up here, week 0, August 24th, Miami and Florida neutral site game in Orlando, and then Arizona makes the long trip out to Hawaii for a little late night degenerate action there with a 10:30 Eastern time kickoff on Saturday, August 24th. And Rolf, one of the other things that we talked about last week, and one of the things that we always talk about here in the lead up to the season, is the construction of power ratings. It's getting organized before the start of the season, having an idea of where these teams should be valued, having an idea of where some of those lines should be, and also seeing if those season win totals line up. So I know that's a big hallmark of your handicapping as well, putting those power ratings together. What's that process look like for you?
Well, for me, it's really a 3-year process. And what I do is I go back and I basically do a plus minus on the previous year's team and then look at where my plus minus was from the year before. So often we look at teams and say, wow, they have 10 returning starters back, they're not going to be good. Or they have 16 plus returning starters, they're going to be good. But let's be honest. There's many times that a horrible team, a crappy team, returns 16 or 17 starters. Well, those 16 or 17 starters went 2-10 last year. They're not going to improve that much. So you have to look at a process of how many returning starters the team had last year, what their stats were as far as yard per game, conference yard per game, turnovers were, how that translated into a win record, and then look at the next year, how many starters they had back, how that translated into wins, and then make your progression this year. So for me, the power ratings are basically a plus minus for a 3-year period. There's teams like Ohio State and Alabama that rarely return over 12 starters because of the losses of underclassmen to the draft as well as the seniors, but those teams have learned to play well with those. What I do look is when a team perhaps had 10 returning starters 3 years ago, improved with 12 or 13 returning starters last year, and now has 15 or 16 returning starters. When you have a 3-year progression or a 3-year regression, those are the teams I tend to truly look to fade or play on early in the year.
Well, and something else I want to touch on here, because this piggybacks off of what I talked about yesterday on the Bettor's Box. I had a listener question about how to organize a spreadsheet for bet tracking. And I sort of segued that into, again, something I mentioned here already, how important it is to be organized. And one of the things that's great about you, Rolf, even if people don't buy your picks over at wagertalk.com, you provide a lot of free content. You do a lot of, newsletter style sheets. You send out PDFs. You've got charts and tables and graphs and all these important angles. But that stuff also helps you because, as you just mentioned, you want to differentiate between how teams performed in the non-conference, how they performed in conference play. Did they get better as the season went along? And because you're sending out that information to begin with, it keeps you organized. It helps that research process for you. So it streamlines your ability to do your power ratings in a timely fashion. And that's something I really want to drive home with our listeners here in the lead up to the college football season as well as the NFL season. This is the time of year where you want to organize everything so it's right there at your fingertips when the games actually get underway.
And it's so easy to do. Let's just say use college basketball for an example because there's so many games. I actually put my 3-star favorites in one column, a 4-star favorite in one column, a 5-star favorite in one column, 3-star dog, 4-star dog, and 4-star favorites, and then over-unders as well. And I actually color code a win as a green, a red as a loss, so you can see the streaks you've had. And then what I also do is I take the team I'm playing on and the team I'm playing against. Again, each one's color coded. One's a win, one's a loss. And I put them in a spreadsheet, and then I sort them by team. And you'd be surprised, come January 2nd, all of a sudden, boy, I am 0-4 on Boise plays. I completely have misread this team. I might have been on them twice and lost. I might have played against them twice and lost. But there's certain teams that you just can't read the same. So even during the season, I am sorting out teams that I've played well on, teams that I've played poorly on, and then, again, make those adjustments in your power ratings and make those adjustments mentally that perhaps I'm reading the Idaho Statesman and what the coach is saying isn't translating to how they're playing on the court. When you're reading and you're studying and you're in season and you're changing your power ratings, there's certainly coaches that tell you exactly how a team is gonna play this week, and they're completely on point. There's other times where a coach is completely off. I think we're ready, or I think we had bad practices. And those are what you have to learn even as the season progresses. And that's what a spreadsheet helps. You have to look back at your data, analyze the plays, learn from the good wins, and learn from the losses, just as importantly.
All right, so let's dive into some of these conferences here, and let's go ahead and start with the Pac-12. And I think the Pac-12 is extremely interesting this year because really as a whole, this conference has been down in terms of the revenue sports. You know, they haven't had a team that's really been a college football playoff contender over the last couple of years. Last year, everybody in the conference, except for Washington State, lost at least 4 games. Washington was 10-4. Utah was 9-5, won the South at 6-3. And then in basketball, you know, they get Oregon into the tournament with that big run that they had in the conference tournament. But other than that, it was kind of a down year for the Pac-12 there. So I think there's a little bit of pressure on this conference as a whole to just have a better overall season. Do you see that being the case?
I don't. Now, while I see teams improved, I also see teams closer being bunched together. You know, teams like Arizona State, everyone wanted to play against Arizona State last year with Herm Edwards in his first year, and everyone was wrong. There's not one person I talked to that was excited about Herm Edwards being there after all the years. Well, look at what they've done. At teams like Arizona, you're going to see improvement. Arizona was 5-7 last year, but they were plus 26 yards per game in conference play. That made them the second best team in the conference behind Utah. So I think while the better teams are better, I think the middle run teams are also better, where we're going to see a lot of teams beat each other up, and I don't see anyone being clear of at least 2 losses in the conference.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was kind of looking at here. I mean, there's a lot of steam for a team like Utah, and we're just going to kind of bounce around the conference here, going back and forth between the divisions. There's a lot of steam for a team like Utah. And I love Kyle Whittingham. We all love Kyle Whittingham. A lot of us probably think he's a top 5 coach, if not top 5, certainly top 10. But this is the problem with the Pac-12. Utah does not recruit on an elite level. They're not getting those 5-star kids out of California or anything like that. They're just a hard-nosed football team that's almost always very strong in the trenches and a good defensive type of team. And this isn't to take away from Utah. This isn't to shit on what Kyle Whittingham has accomplished there. It's simply to say that when you look at the Pac-12 South and you've got Arizona State, USC, Arizona, UCLA, those are 4 schools where you would think that they would do much better in the recruiting department than a team like Utah. But a lot of people like Utah to win the Pac-12 South. And again, not a knock on Utah, but I think just a commentary on where the conference actually is right now.
Well, I think the team that finally has not recruited well because of all of as poorly as they played is USC. I mean, USC for all those years was almost a top 5 recruiting base. Anyone in Southern California wanted to play for USC. Well, there was only 1 5-star recruited this year in the entire Pac-12, and that was at Oregon. The top recruiters this year: Oregon, Washington, USC, Stanford. So, you know, USC being 3rd is a shock. But to me, you know, you talk about Utah, and yeah, there's a lot of steam on Utah. And while Utah is clearly not the best team, the schedule plays out for Utah to be the best team. Remember, the Pac-12 has 9 conference games. So half of the conference plays 4 road games, half of the conference plays 5. Utah's one of those teams that only plays 4 games. And more importantly, in the crossover games between the divisions, Utah does not play Oregon, and they do not play Stanford, 2 of the top 4 teams in the opposite division. So with the 4 road games, with the teams they don't play, and you have to remember, that 9-5 record, how impressive was that, beating Oregon and BYU down the stretch when they didn't have Tyler Huntley or Zach Moss for the last 5 games? So putting those 2 back into the offense, having 14 returning starters back for a 2nd straight year, Utah is the steam, and Utah is the pick that most people are making. Unfortunately, I'm going to agree with them and make that pick as well.
Yeah, look at Utah right now, season win total out there in the 9 range, generally the over-juiced for them, which again kind of speaks to that schedule that they have. Their season win total 9, minus 125 the over. I've got them about 9.18 wins based on my power rating, so I'm kind of in line with the market there. Another team I'm in line with the market on is Washington. As we transition back to the North Division here for a second, Washington with the highest season win total here, 9.5. I'm at 9.41 wins for them. So maybe a slight lean to the under 9.5 at plus money. Not nearly big enough for me to take advantage of it. But Washington, they've got some new blood there. Certainly some interesting players that a lot of people are kind of excited to see. Most importantly, Jacob Eason, the transfer from Georgia. We've got this respect level for Chris Peterson where we just assume year in and year out his team's going to be very strong. Are they the clear-cut favorite for you in the North, or do you feel like they've got some challengers?
I have them third in the North. I am not a Washington Husky fan. Yes, they only play 4 road games, but the 2 teams they skip are UCLA and Arizona State, the 2 middle-of-the-road teams. I just cannot back this Husky team with only 2 starters back on defense. They had 16 starters back, including, a quarterback, Jake Browning. And they were the team loaded last year. And yet they finished conference play with 82 yards per game, but a lot of that came in the demolition of Washington State where they were plus 250 yards. Against the rest of the conference, they were very mediocre. 7 starters back on offense, and yes, you had Jacob Eason, the number 1 quarterback, 13 starts at Georgia. He's going to be productive. But the last few years, after having 9 defensive starters back last year, and allowing 16.4 points per game with only 2 returning starters and missing 7 of your top 8 tacklers, I have Washington, again, third in this conference behind Oregon and Washington State.
See, that's interesting. I mean, so you've got an Oregon team. Obviously, Justin Herbert comes back. A lot of people made a big deal out of that because of, where he would have had a chance to go in the draft. But Washington State has yet another new quarterback. And you kind of wonder here. I mean, obviously the system's going to create a lot of gaudy offensive numbers for their quarterbacks, but it just seems like every year Mike Leach has so much success with these guys. You think that trend will continue then?
Well, you have to remember, you look at last year, they were playing USC early in the year. You have a returning quarterback coming back, and you have your leader who had a 38-9 ratio, and you pull him in the third quarter because he's not playing well. What I relate with this, and, you have Gabe Goubart, who started, who has 32 starts at Eastern Washington. He's throwing for 9,000 yards, and he's throwing for 88 touchdowns. So you have an established quarterback, but I'm going to tell people to think back to those Texas Tech days and those air raids. It didn't matter who the quarterback was. They passed for 4,000 yards. They completed 70-some%. That's the Mike Leach air raid system. Whoever is there is going to complete 70%, and they're going to play well. So now you're looking at a Washington State team that last year was plus 65 yards per game in conference play. That was with that Washington loss. Last year, they only had 10 starters back, and he went 11-2. Well, this year he has 13 starters back, plus you're adding in an experienced quarterback with a defense that's greatly improved and returns 3 of their top 4 tacklers. They did lose the safety who went in the draft, in the supplemental draft. That is a big loss for them, losing Thompson. But I still think they're good enough. They do play 5 road games. They skip USC and Arizona. But I think they're worth a small bit to win the Pac-12. The problem for me is this: Mike Leach. I just sometimes he makes decisions that are so crazy. Mike Leach costs them a game a year. Yes, he may win them a game or 2 a year, but there's just times you pull your hair out watching Mike Leach and some of his decisions on what he does that I just can't have the utmost confidence with the Cougars, although I pick them second in the division.
Interesting schedule for the Cougars here. They play what's quote-unquote a neutral site game, but it's still in the city of Houston against the Cougars in the non-conference. They're at Utah. They're at Washington in the Apple Cup to end the year. So those are kind of the games that you're looking at there from a Washington State standpoint. Real quickly, while we're still in the Pac-12 North here, what about Stanford? I found Stanford a very difficult team to try and power rate this year? Because they have that long history of success. David Shaw's maybe not the greatest in-game coach, but he's still a pretty good recruiter. They've had some running back turnover. They're still trying to figure out what's going on at the quarterback position. But you still have to give them respect because year in and year out, they usually have one of the better defenses here in the conference. They always have that power running game to fall back on. Did you have a hard time power rating Stanford this year?
I didn't. I have them fourth. I just have them down a couple levels. And again, this is my 3-year progression. In 2017, they went 9-5 with 16 returning starters and a quarterback. In 2018, they went 9-4, but they had 15 returning starters. This year, they have 9 returning starters, only 4 on the offense, 5 on the defense. And when you look at last year's 9-4 squad, they were outgained on the year. They were outgained by 29 yards on the season. They were outgained by 29 yards per game on the season, by 9 yards per game in conference play. So you have a team that was outgained in conference play and only returns 9 starters with 4 on the offensive side. I think they take a step back. You're losing your 2 best players, Bryce Love. Obviously, we know what he's done, even though he was banged up and only had 700-plus yards. But you're also missing Arcadia Whiteside, one of the best receivers in the conference. You're missing each of your top 3 receivers. I have no problems dropping Stanford to 4th in the conference, just ahead of Cal.
All right, so as we take a look here at the Pac-12 South, we mentioned Utah a little bit already. We also mentioned USC and some of the challenges that they've had from a recruiting standpoint. As, you know, these high school kids aren't dumb, man. They've started to take notice of what's happening there with the Trojans. Maybe Graham Harrell is the difference, but they still have Clay Helton there, and, you know, he has been a difference in a negative way for that program there in Southern California. What about the 2 Arizona schools? You mentioned Arizona as a team that could take a big leap with Kevin Sumlin, with a healthier Khalil Tate here. They did get some love in the season win total market, and it sounds like you agreed with it.
I did. You know, this was my toughest conference because between USC, Arizona State, UCLA, and Arizona, from 2 through 5, I kept playing around which was the best team based on where the schedules were and who I liked the most, and I really had the most difficult time. Again, Arizona State is a team last year with 12 returning starters, this year 15 back, and Arizona with Kevin Sumlin. You know, I go back and I remember how dynamic Khalil Tate was and how different he had to play when he was banged up. Well, they had 14 starters back. Sumlin in his second year. Yeah, a lot of people rip Sumlin for what he's done, but I think he could take this team to the next level. 15 returning starters, and as I said, they were plus 26 yards per game in conference play. That was the 4th best in the entire conference, despite having the 5-7 record. So, you know, I look at Arizona, Arizona State, UCLA, and USC, and I still haven't made my final determination on how those teams are going to finish. I think they're all going to be in that 6-3, 5-4, 4-5, depending on turnovers and depending on injuries when they play each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, it's weird to walk into a season with USC, see their season win total at 7. The over was juiced a little bit. I've got them more around 6.5 wins, so I'm not very high on the Trojans either. Stanford, maybe around a 7-win team. Arizona State, same thing. Arizona's the team I actually like the most at 7.19 wins based on my numbers, but I'm expecting, you know, Khalil Tate really improved as a passer last year because he couldn't run as much with that ankle injury. Now maybe he is more of a true dual threat type of guy. But I think that, you know, this is one of those situations where one of those 4 teams has to emerge, right? One of those 4 teams has to have a higher ceiling as the season goes along. Like you, I'm just not sure which one it is exactly.
It is. Arizona has the toughest road slate because they, you know, Colorado game is going to be a win most likely, but they go to USC, they go to Stanford, they go to Oregon, they go to Arizona State. So, you know, you're having to play multiple teams that are above you or equal in your standings with 5 road games. So, you know, that'll probably have them down a notch, although talent-wise, you know, they're as good as, and that's the difference when we're talking about which team is better or where they finish in a conference. So much of where they finish in the conference is based on the schedule, the back-to-back road games, the sandwich situations, and the crossover games. So the best team usually doesn't dictate where they finish in the conference.
All right, so let's move over to the Big 12 conference here for a little while. And no divisions here in this one, so we're just talking about the conference as a whole. And obviously we start with Oklahoma. Season win total 10.5, juice to the over. A lot of hype, a lot of expectations, a lot being placed on this team. We'll see what kind of fit Jalen Hurts is. You kind of read between the lines of some of Lincoln Riley's comments over the last week and a half. Maybe he's not fully sure what he has yet in Jalen Hurts at the quarterback position, but obviously talent all around for him. They'll make it as easy as they possibly can. Do you see Oklahoma reaching this lofty ceiling of 10.5 wins, which by default would put them very much in the college football playoff discussion?
I think so by default. Looking at their schedule, I have them a double-digit favorite in all but 3 games. The 3 games I don't have them a double-digit favorite, I have them a favorite of 6 or more. Those are the Texas game neutral, at Oklahoma State, and at UCLA. So when you're a 6-point favorite in every game, that translates into that 10.5 win total. So are they going to get upset twice? I don't know that. Last year they got upset once. The year before they got upset once. And the year before they got upset once against Houston, against Iowa State, and against Texas in the regular season. So, Lincoln Riley has proven that he's a coach that gets things done. He's a coach that you want to play on as an away favorite especially. He doesn't mind running up the score. And although you only have 12 starters back, let's remember this. Last year's team only had 12 starters back with a new quarterback. And while Jalen Hurts may not be the number 1 pick in the draft, the guy was 24-2 as a starter in the toughest conference in football. So to me, that says enough that if I had to play it, I am not playing it. I would have to lay the juice and tend to go over that number.
So is it Texas that's their biggest competitor then? I mean, is this the year that maybe the Longhorns get back to prominence?
Not for me. Texas has all the love in the world. Ehlinger has all the love in the world. I am not a Longhorn backer at all. I have them 4th in the Big 12. Why? Well, last year they had 14 returning starters. The year before they had 16. This year they have 8. They have 8 returning starters, the fewest in football. And yes, you're going to say you have Sam Ehlinger back. Well, he had a 25-5 ratio last year. How much better can he really do? Yeah, I mean, he was 65% to 25-5 ratio. Even if he has a Heisman-type season, you still have a Texas team that outgained in conference play. They were 7-3 in conference play, and they got outgained. They haven't learned to win those big games. Yes, they, beat Oklahoma last year, but then they lose a couple of games where the lines were between 3s at Oklahoma State and home against West Virginia. I love Tom Herman. I think Texas is headed in the right direction, but I am under in their season win totals, and I have them 4th in the conference this year.
Well, and again, what's interesting, and people have talked about this a lot, and I think I saw Brad mention this, and I'm sure you've mentioned it before as well. Tom Herman just does well in that underdog role. But now that there are these expectations for a program that's fallen short of them for so many consecutive years now, there's a little bit of worry involved with that. And I can see why people are high on this team. I can see why they like the returning production, why they like the direction that Tom Herman is going. But also, they have to prove that they can live up to these expectations here. And for me, they're favored in all but 2 of their games, I believe, the Oklahoma neutral game. And then also I had them a pick 'em at Iowa State. They've got, some lofty things that they have to, or I guess the LSU game as well. I've got them a short dog in at home. But again, this is a team that they have to live up to those expectations as a favorite. And we still have to see that from both Tom Herman and also this program.
Adam, the other negative I have with the Longhorns is in my top 5, I have Oklahoma, TCU, Iowa State, and Baylor. They have to go to Iowa State, and they have to go to Baylor. And they have to go to TCU. So you're taking the 5 teams the top 5 teams in the Big 12, and they play all 4 of the top 5 besides themselves on the road. They play Oklahoma neutral, at Baylor, at Iowa State, at TCU. I don't see them getting through that gauntlet, but at 2-2.
All right, so look at the rest of it here. As I mentioned, I've got Iowa State as a pick'em there in that game against Texas. Is Iowa State the third team for you here in this conference, and are they pretty clearly the third team?
Well, they are, and I look at them, and again, this is another 3-year progression of returning starters. Remember, Matt Campbell took over this team after the 2015 season. They had gone 2-10 and 3-9 the last 2 years under Rhodes, and then Campbell takes over 3-9 the first year, no problem. He has 11 starters back, and he goes 8-5. He has 12 starters back in 18, and he goes 8-5 again. And then this year he has 16 starters back, again with Brock Purdy back. I mean, I think Brock Purdy as a true was amazing last year. 66% with a 16-7 ratio, 16 returning starters. I'm a big Matt Campbell fan. I loved what he did at Toledo. You look at the schedule. The schedule only has the schedule does have 5 road games, but I consider the West Virginia and the Kansas State winnable games, and then the toss-ups are Oklahoma and Baylor with Texas Tech a probable win. So I have it where I think they can run their home schedule, including versus Texas and TCU, and end up with 2 losses in conference play, improving on the 5. Matt Campbell went 2-7 in conference play the first year, 5-4 in the second, 6-3 in the third, and I have them going 7-2 this year.
All right, so in terms of looking at the rest of the Big 12 here, TCU, not really sure what's going to happen with them at the quarterback position. They seem to have a different issue here year in and year out. Baylor, a team on the rise with Matt Rule doing a very good job. Oklahoma State replacing quite a bit. Mike Gundy's got to figure out another quarterback here. Texas Tech with a coaching change. West Virginia coaching change. Kansas State coaching change. And Kansas with a coaching change. So after the top 3 here in this conference, I think it's kind of hard to figure out what to expect.
Yeah, I'm looking for a big season from Matt Rule. I bet them over. As far as the season win totals go, I certainly like them over. They went through some injuries last year. Matt Rule now in his 3rd year of the system after taking over. He took over a very disgruntled program going 1-11. Huge improvement last year at 7-6. But they're a team that was -4 yards per game in conference play at going 4-5. And you look at their road schedule, it's the easiest in the Big 12 by far. Their road games, Kansas State, a win. Oklahoma State, I have them as a win. At Kansas, I have them as a win. At TCU, that game, they're going to be a dog, but not a huge dog. So, in that game against TCU, they also benefit because they play West Virginia on a Thursday the night before at home, so they have extra rest going into that TCU game. With that road schedule, they don't play Oklahoma and Texas till the end of the year. So if Charlie Brewer can get it going, with 15 returning starters, 7 on the defensive side, 8 of the top 9 tacklers are back. You have your top running back. You do lose Hurd, the receiver, but you've got plenty of guys coming behind. Baylor's a team I'll keep my eye on. If they can win those couple games early at home against Iowa State and then win that Texas Tech game, they're a team that I think can be the big surprise and pull the biggest upset in the country off by winning the Pac-12 if they're hot going into Oklahoma and Texas, which they host November 16th and 23rd.
Well, and this is one of those things, too. We've talked about this before with teams that kind of fit a different style within their conference. And we expected some growing pains with Matt Rule going to Baylor because they were going to go from this high-octane, up-tempo, all-skill talent team under Art Briles and, of course, his son Kendall to more of a physical brand of football, more of a team built from the trenches out, a team that probably would have one of the better defenses in this conference. Now the offense is catching up too. And I think that's one of the more intriguing situations around college football when you get a dynamic like this of a physical team in a non-physical conference where they're kind of setting that foundation and maybe now they have the quarterback for it with Charlie Brewer that Baylor does become a lot more interesting here, and I think they are one of those teams I'd rather be higher on coming into the season than trying to catch up with as the season goes along.
Well, I could see Baylor. You look at Baylor's first 8 games. They're probably going to be a top 25 team ranked after 8 games because they're going to be 7-1 at worst in my book, maybe losing against Iowa State at home. So, with Rule here in the third year, I don't mind teams making that top 25 appearance if the team is comfortable with their coach and if the coach is comfortable with his players. It's those teams that have that first-year success with a first-year head coach that all of a sudden pop in the top 25 that I will absolutely play against that first week. So I think perhaps after beating West Virginia and going to TCU, this game can get a lot of pub with both teams potentially ranked if they're playing up to the level I think they're going to be. And with Matt Rule leadership and with him in his third season here, I think the Bears are a veteran enough team to be able to handle that role.
All right, so you mentioned first-year coaches and trying to have success there in that first year. And look, this is a tough job for Les Miles, so I'm going to exclude him from this discussion here. Texas Tech with Matt Wells, West Virginia with Neil Brown, Kansas State with Chris Kleiman from North Dakota State, Kleiman, whatever it is. Which one of those 3 teams is set up for the most immediate success with the new head coach?
Is neither option 5?
Sure, that's fine.
You look at Les Miles. I mean, Kansas, Kansas is Kansas. Kansas got a game by 121 yards in conference play. And if you look at Kansas and you say, they went 3-9, they showed some improvement last year, they're a better team. Let's not forget, those wins against Central Michigan and Rutgers, they were plus 6 turnovers in both of those wins. They were plus 12 turnovers in 2 games. Otherwise, they'd be 1-9 and have 1 win against TCU. So Kansas is way down. West Virginia, I don't know what's going on. There's many players that have left already. I think West Virginia is down to 7, maybe 6 returning starters. There's been maybe one team in the last 7 years that has that few returning starters. I think they're in trouble with that offense, with all the deletions they've had. Texas Tech, you look at Matt Wells. Well, air raid for all those years. Matt Wells says he's not going to change that much this year. But again, changing from what Utah State did with a balanced offense with, they've always had a strong running back. And I don't see that happening in Texas Tech. And, Kansas State's another team that recruits 3 stars that Bill Snyder turned into real good 3 stars or semi 4 stars. And yes, Chris Kleiman comes from North Dakota State with his OC, but, I go back to look what happened at Wyoming and, a North Dakota State coach taking over and hasn't really had that success. So will it translate? I don't know. So who the best would be, I don't have an answer. I would say, I would say Matt Wells, because to me, Texas Tech has 13 returning starters with a quarterback back that was the best team going into this year. So with the new coaches, I'll make them my best team coming out of the year.
Last thing I'll ask you about here with the Big 12, and then we'll transition over to the Mountain West. Is Oklahoma a Final Four team? Will they make the college football playoff?
I don't do too much predicting in the Final Four. But I would have to say with their schedule, yes. The negative I'll say is this. If Oklahoma has 1 loss and the Pac-12 has a team with 1 loss, or the Big Ten has a team with 1 loss, I think those teams will jump ahead of Oklahoma just because the Sooners have been in it. I think there's still politics involved. So I think they have the toughest road for that reason. But I'll put them at 1 loss. But if everyone from the Big Ten has 2 losses and the Pac-12, yes, I have them in. If they're tied, I think they'll get left out just because they've been there and done that. It's the wrong thing to say, but I think the committee does have that thought in their minds when they make the final decision.
Well, and it's tough, too, to try and project the Final Four because, let's be honest, there are two spots available in the playoff because Alabama has one and Clemson has the other. And we talked about this last week. Clemson, at least a 16-point favorite in literally every regular season game they play this year, and they'll be a double-digit favorite in the ACC championship game as well, so long as nothing happens to Trevor Lawrence over the course of the season. So we're talking about, 4 or 5 teams that have, 2 open spots for the college football playoff. So, it is pretty hard to project which ones, I should say, those will actually be once we get to, selection Saturday or Sunday, whatever it is there, in mid-December. All right, let's go to the Mountain West Conference here. I think this is a pretty interesting conference because it's very top-heavy. I think Boise State, clearly the best team. I'm sure you will agree with me there, although they've got questions with a new quarterback that they have to try to break in. But it looks like the other contenders in this conference have taken a few steps backwards.
They have, and, I get asked the question a lot on radio, obviously being here in Las Vegas, what about the Rebels? So let's start with the Rebels. The Rebels, you look and 13 returning starters, is a decent amount back relative to what they had, 8 on the offensive side. But I'm going to start with UNLV. I saw win totals of 5, and I would certainly bet under 5, but I think a lot of them right now have gone to 4.5. I only have the Rebels favored in 2 games. I think Sanchez will be out. I think they'll try to find a name this year. They're going to move into Raider Stadium next year, and I'll tell you what, if you're deciding between Mountain West teams and, you're good enough to go to Boise or you're good enough to go to Utah State, or you could come to UNLV and play in Raider Stadium, that's going to get them a couple recruits. I think that could even get them a 4-star and a couple strong 3-stars moving to an NFL stadium if they get the right head coach. So, while UNLV is a team that pulled a couple big upsets and had quarterback injuries early, I still have them as a team that's only going to win 3 games and better only than New Mexico and San Jose State.
New Mexico is one to talk about here for a second because I think this team will be a train wreck all year long. I have them rated very poorly in my power ratings. I actually have them 118th out of 130 in my power ratings. Their season win total was 4.5 minus $1.30 on the under. It may have moved around a little bit. I only have this team about 3.5 wins this year because Bob Davie's going to get fired at some point. I mean, I don't know why they're going into this season with him anyway. He's just a lame duck head coach. When he gets fired, I'm sure that throws this weird offensive scheme all out of whack. New Mexico is going to be one of the worst teams in the country, and there's a few of those here. Colorado State looks bad. San Jose State was a 1-11 team last year. They were better against the number, obviously, but they only won 1 game. The bottom of this conference is very, very bad.
Yeah, I have Colorado State just a little better than UNLV. I have them the 4th worst. I agree with you with San Jose. San Jose is a team got outgained by 148 yards per game in conference play. Well, that makes you the non-competitive range. You were 1-11. Is it because you had few starters? No, you had 14 returning starters last year. You have 13 back this year. New Mexico, I agree with you. Minus 180 yards per game in conference play. Just miserable. Last year, you had 13 returning starters back. Well, is it better? No. You have 10 back this year, and you have 2 on defense. People talked about New Mexico being an over team with the option last year. Boy, if their offense plays decently, they're going to be an over team this year because they allowed 473 yards per game, 4.9 yards per carry, and 36 points per game last year with 6 returning starters. Imagine what they're going to do with 2 returning starters this year, including losing their top 8 tacklers.
So as we look at this thing here, I mean, it doesn't look like Boise State has any challenger in the Mountain Division. We just talked about New Mexico and Colorado State, they're bottom feeders. Utah State with the coaching change, and I don't love the hire of Gary Anderson at all whatsoever. Wyoming just doesn't have the talent. Air Force, same thing. Who is the second best team in the Mountain?
I like Air Force. I really do. I have Air Force higher than most people. I look at what they did last year. They were 3-5, but in that 3-5 record, they were actually plus 32 yards per game, and they only had 10 starters back last year. This year, Hammond has experience. Sanders has experience at quarterback. Both played last year. Both are back this year, improved. 14 returning starters, which is very high for a option team. In fact, they haven't had higher than 14 returning starters back in 2014, which was their 10-3 year. The problem is, to me, the Air Force Falcons play Colorado week 3 on the road, and then they play Boise on a short week in week 4. And I just see that too tough of a situation playing those two teams that you are focused on the entire year, whereas Boise hosts Portland State the week before and then home again for that short week. But I'm going to take a flyer on Air Force to win the Mountain West. They're actually going to have to pull that upset at Boise. But where the things have happened, especially early in the season, I agree with you. Boise State has to be the favorite. But, they only have 13 returning starters. They're breaking in a new quarterback. The reason they have to be the favorite is they don't play San Diego State and they don't play Fresno State in the crossover games. That's your two biggest rivals that have hurt you in the past. You skip those two physical teams, and that puts you at a different level. But I'm gonna go ahead and go on the line and pick a shocker to win the Mountain West and call for Air Force just to have some fun and give our listeners a long shot to play.
Well, and as we look at the West Division here, Fresno State last year 7-1 in conference play. They only gave up 87 points in 8 conference games, which is absurd. They were 12-2 overall. They outscored the opposition by 286 points last year. So they were just dominant. But they lose their starting quarterback, lose 2 1,000-yard receivers, and their offensive coordinator. So this is a completely rebuilt offensive team for Fresno State. Are they still the class of the West Division, though?
No, I put them behind San Diego State. And again, the 3-year regression as far as starters go. In Tedford's first year, he had 16 returning starters with a quarterback, and he went 10-4. Last year, he had 15 returning starters with a quarterback, went 12-2. This year, he has 9 returning starters, only 3 on offense. I think the OC loss is huge. You look at what he did at Eastern Michigan. He turned that team into an offensive power after Eastern Michigan hadn't been forever. And his loss is clearly Indiana's gained. And, I think that it's going to be an underlooked reason why they're going to struggle early. And I have them losing their first 2 games. They go to USC on August 31st. Then they host Minnesota, and I think Row the Boat's going to get them. So, I think they'll be looking for some feel-good wins against Sacramento State and against New Mexico State in September, late September.
So San Diego State's an interesting one here. And I kind of have these teams basically power rated in a similar area. I've got Fresno about 1.5 better than San Diego State on a neutral. For San Diego State, the obvious worry is so much running back turnover over the last few years. You kind of wonder, will Washington stay healthy? Will they find anybody at quarterback that can actually move this team down the field? But Rocky Long is always prepared with that 3-3-5 defense. It's something that teams in the Mountain West have seen for years. And it seems like they still really struggle with it. So do you actually like San Diego State a little bit more than Fresno State from a power rating standpoint too? Or is it just sort of the schedule and the way that things shake out?
I actually have Fresno a few points higher than San Diego State as far as that goes. But San Diego State hosts Fresno. Fresno's schedule in November. They go to Hawaii, then they host Utah State, and then they have to go to San Diego State on a short week. I don't see them overcoming that. But I am going to pull one more shocker. And let's just throw this entire conference into turmoil. I'm picking Air Force in one division, and I'm going to pick Hawaii in the other.
Okay. All right. Now, see, Hawaii is fascinating to me because, over the last several years, they've been awful at home. And in fact, I had their home field advantage as low as 2 points last year based on the system that I used for home field advantage because they just weren't producing at home. They weren't covering. They weren't winning when they were supposed to. They just weren't playing well at home. Last year, they started to play a little bit better at home, and they kind of got things going in the right direction offensively, and the defense was a little bit better too. So you're just expecting those gains to continue for Nick Rolovich's team.
Well, they really got banged up in the back seven last year. And when you look at their schedule, they played BYU, Nevada, Fresno State, and Utah State back-to-back games, and they allowed almost 50 points per game in those 4 games. Well, you look at how good Fresno State was last year. You look at how good Utah State was last year. Those can be expected. The BYU, they were playing in a horrible situation at BYU after they were struggling. And then the Nevada game, they had at home. They have 18 returning starters. That's the most in college football. And you look at the improvement last year. Last year they had 8 returning starters. You have to go back and remember how big of a dog. They were a 16-point dog at Colorado State. And all of a sudden Cole McDonald comes out and, oh, my God, what's this offense? They have that big lead. They hold on to win. Then they beat Navy, and then they beat Rice. Cole McDonald played most of the season injured. We found that out now, that how hurt he was. But he still finished number 8 in pass yards, almost 3,900 yards, and their backup had 400 yards as well. I think 18 returning starters. I think Nick Rolovich has this team headed in the right direction. I think their home field edge is back. They host Fresno. They host San Diego State, the 2 teams above them in the conference. If they pull the upset in one of those or perhaps both, I think they're a live dog to win the entire Mountain West.
Well, and if you want to be super grossed out, go ahead to Twitter and find out what was wrong with Cole McDonald last year. It will make you cringe. I can certainly tell you that. One other team I want to mention here in the Mountain West Division here is Nevada. Last year I was pretty high on Nevada. They did cash a season win total ticket over for me. This year I'm not as sure. And I want to get your take on Nevada. You mentioned a lot about UNLV already, and obviously you got to be quite plugged into UNLV with where you're located. And, almost by default, you're sort of plugged into what's going on with the Wolfpack as well. So what about Nevada for this year? How do you kind of see them fitting in this mix?
Well, my win total has them at 6.3. They're going to be a favorite against Weber State. They'll be a favorite against Hawaii, but again, that wouldn't surprise me if Hawaii beats them. They'll be a favorite against San Jose, New Mexico, and UNLV. So the nice thing, if you're a Wolfpack fan, is you have 5 very winnable games at home, and that's what you have to look at. You can't expect teams, when you're a mediocre team, you can't expect teams to beat bad teams on the road. It's not an automatic. You have to learn to win on the road. But when you are hosting Weber State, Hawaii, San Jose State, UNLV, and New Mexico, those are 4 wins right there. So that has me looking at the over. You also have a road game at UTEP. So there's 5 wins, maybe 6. So I have Nevada ahead of UNLV, ahead of San Diego State with their 11 returning starters. They had 14 back last year, and they played very well. They were plus 96 yards per game. But you look at those yards per game, and they rolled up 636 yards against Colorado State. They had a 636 to 260 yard edge. So much is slanted, beating one horrible opponent on the road when they finished the season playing 3 of the bottom 4 teams. So, I have them in that maybe 500 range, maybe 1 game under. I have them winning 5 games on the season, maybe 6.
Yeah, I've got them in my season win total projections down for 6.2. You said you were at 6.3. So we're pretty much in the same area there. But the biggest thing for Nevada, and we'll do this a little bit more as we get closer to the season here and kind of hone in on some of these teams a little bit more. Malik Henry, the transfer quarterback, originally at Florida State, obviously got some airtime on Last Chance U and didn't really look all that great during his season of Last Chance U. Kind of looked a little bit combative. It was sort of not really the optics weren't the greatest for him. Him and his coach both talked about it after the show and said, hey, it wasn't actually like this. They took some liberties with the editing, stuff like that. But he's the key part in all of this for Nevada. And I think there are a lot of situations around the country like this going into this season where the quarterbacks will determine the ceiling. And this is one of them. He's going to have the chance to throw a lot in that modified air raid, but will he be that guy? Because Ty Ganji was pretty decent at it. You don't have a whole lot of success behind Henry, assuming he wins the job. So that's the big question there for Nevada is, will they have that guy to run this pass-dependent scheme? If they don't, you want to adjust very quickly on a team like that.
Great point. And, this kid was the number 3 quarterback going to Florida State a couple years ago, 2 years at a JC, so he's had playing experience. And being here for the spring is a big deal. I'm not sure he's named him as the starter yet. I mean, I'm sure he's going to be the starter, but, there's some coaches that like to hold off and make it as if though it's a competition. But, I think sooner than later he goes into the fall camp knowing he's the starter, getting the receivers accustomed to him. It's just a situation where the schedule is so tough. Going to Utah State, going to San Diego State, going to Fresno State, those teams that are in your range or just above you, you have to go on the road. And it's not going to be an easy start. Hosting Purdue, they'll be wild and crazy in Reno, and it'll be exciting. But, if they lose to Purdue, then they go to Oregon week 2. When you have a team that has a new quarterback and struggling against 2 FBS or Power 5 teams the first 2 weeks, a lot of times can hurt a quarterback's confidence. We'll see what happens, because after that he has Weber State and UTEP, and things will get right quick, I'm sure, at that point.
All right, so we took a look here on today's show at the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the Mountain West. We'll keep doing some more of these conference previews as we get closer to the season here. But, Rolf, let's leave on this point. You've got your power ratings. We've got the season win total odds are already out there, some of the value extracted. Maybe some value is still out there as we learn about position battles, injuries, all that type of thing. Lots of games of the year lines. What is Rolf Michaels doing here over those final, I believe you said it was 32 days, to get ready for the college football season? What's left to do?
Well, actually, the next week is preseason football. I love the NFL preseason. I've had great success. I'll be putting out a preseason guide. But then it's just looking to see and doing a lot of reading, doing how these teams are playing. We're going to lose couple all-conference players to injuries. It's going to happen throughout the year. That's going to have a lot of effect on teams. And then I still go back and I retweak my power ratings. I go through, I do what the reading is. I look, and perhaps I made my mistakes. I look what other people like, and I'm not afraid to change them. You're always adjusting your power ratings. You never stop adjusting your power ratings until the final bowl game's over. So it's a lot of reading, a lot of tweaking, and trying to find matchups and situations. I do go through each schedule, and I like marking the one game on each schedule that's a bulletin board game. When you're doing your reading now, there's always a double revenge game or a situation where a team lost. Yeah, when you're Ohio State and Michigan, it's the final game of the year. But when you're Nevada and you lost to UNLV, is that the game you're marking? So look for situations now. Mark them down now, because you may not remember them when the season happens. But if a team pins a game as a bulletin board game at the beginning of the year, look to play against them that week before.
Well, you mentioned that you'll be putting out an NFL preseason guide over at Wager Talk, and make sure that you follow Rolf on Twitter at CalSports, at CalSportsLV. What else you got going on over there at the website, man?
Well, there's still coaching changes up there. There's, and I'll just mention, anyone that bets live baseball, it was a lot of work to put this together. And basically what I did is I broke each MLB game down into 5 situations. Home favorite of 200 or more, home favorite of 151 to 199, home favorite of 120 to 150, between the 120s, 121 to 150, and 150 to 199. So you have 7 situations, and every category in the last 4.5 years, exactly what the record is. So you want to know how a 175 home favorite did when they're trailing by 2 runs after the first inning. If you're thinking about live betting them, I have the records for the last 4.5 years. You want to know how a 200 favorite does down 3 runs after the 3rd inning? I have the situation the last 4.5 years. There's 540 different situations. If you're live betting, you can exactly see what the record was to see if you're getting value on or against that team in that spot.
Well, it sounds great. Definitely make sure you check that out over at wagertalk.com. And as we get closer to the season, we'll have our weekly segment with Rolf, and I'm sure he'll have packages and different other things available for you over there as well. But in the meantime, again, at CalSportsLV, a wealth of phenomenal information on Twitter as well as over there at wagertalk.com. Rolf Michaels, appreciate the time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Adam, great catching up. Thanks.
There you go. There's Rolf Michaels, professional handicapper over at wagertalk.com. Again, at CalSportsLV on Twitter. Coming up on Wednesday, we're going to chat with Lockie Lockerson, also known as Ken Barkley. That's actually his real name. His birth name is not Lockie Lockerson. I'll be chatting with him about his college football guide, which comes out on Amazon on Thursday. So we'll talk with him about why he wrote it, what you can find in that guide, some season win total stuff, all kinds of different things there from Lockie. Thursday, the Bettor's Box, my MLB betting podcast. And then Friday, we'll chat UFC once again with Christian Pina of the Sports Gambling Podcast. And we'll talk with him about a pay-per-view card coming up here on ESPN Plus this weekend. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.